Hi, I'm Rohith. So I'm working on the 3D tank game, and I made some changes. I made some updates. So we'll be looking at what I've come up with this time. So I'll just play the game once. So last time we had set up scriptable objects, and I basically was able to spawn different types of enemies and different types of players using scriptable objects. And this time it's the same, but the thing is, I have made use of I have created a separate enemy spawner. So the enemy tanks now have their own separate controller. So you'll be able to see enemy tank scripts, and they have their own service and MVC scripts, right? And yeah, I've created a separate scripted object script too for the enemies. So this is different from the player tank. Uh, you'll be able to see that enemy tank has extra attribute called strength. So right now my player can't take damage in the sense the enemies are have not started shooting it, right? So I have implemented a kind of feature where if the player gets in contact with the enemy, he'll start losing health. So that's why in the earlier play session you saw that the player got destroyed. So I'll just uh, show it to you again. So we can shoot, obviously, yeah, and I can kill, like, I can shoot tanks and destroy tanks, right? And if I get in contact with the tanks at one point of time, the health will deplete, and yeah, the player will die. Once the player dies, I have created a kind of delayed destruction of all the objects in the scene. So it starts with the enemy tanks, and then one by one, all the objects in the scene gets destroyed. So I'll explain what using what I have done this. So this is basically done using coroutines, a sort of asynchronous programming. So we look at that today and how I've implemented this yeah, this delayed destruction, right? So yeah, so I'll just show you. mm, I'll just show you the enemy where the strength comes in, the strength attribute for the enemy. So this is the enemy strength attribute that I had shown in the scriptable object for enemies, right? So it's strength. So basically when the player, so we'll just go to the player tank view, and when the player gets in contact with an enemy, right? So we get the enemy view object and retrieve the enemy's strength, right? So if you look at enemy view, get enemy strength. So we just go to the enemy controller, and enemy controller has access to the enemy model. So from there we'll just return the strength. So that's how get strength works, and that strength is basically what is being subtracted from the health tanks player tanks health, right? So you take enough number of contacts, the tank will destroy itself, right? Tank controller. So here it is. So this is how it this I'm using the same function for both the bullet and the contact health, right? So the tank takes damage, and finally it dies. So tanks, it calls the tank service and destroys tank. So we watched this, like we made use of this last time as well, but we were not able to do it for the player. But this time the player is able to take damage, and hence it's able to destroy itself. So you just go to tank service, and in tank service we have the destroyed tank. So since this is the player tank, when the player tank dies, I have to uh, spawn a particle effect, right? The explosion effect. And once that is done, I have to basically destroy. Uh, so this is the particle effect. This is where the particle effect happens. And once that is done, I have to destroy the level. So destroying the level consists of two things. So if you see a level service instance and destroy level. So level service, yeah, level service, destroy level. So basically destroying the level contains two things. One thing is destroying all the enemies that are in the scene, and the other thing is destroying the environment, be it the buildings and the trees, rocks, etc. Right. So one thing I've done is the tank explosion, and the next thing is the destroy level. So start coroutine. So I'll explain what coroutines are first. So basically, coroutines are a way to execute code over a period of time. So when you want something to happen, when you want to execute a code over a couple of frames, be it 10 or 100 frames, something, right? So you make use of coroutine so that you don't uh, uh, what halt the other things that are happening in game. So for example, let's say you're downloading some kind of asset for a game, right? And when that happens, say the asset is too big or it's too heavy in size, so the download definitely will take some time. And at that time, if you're not going for asynchronous programming, then the game would just freeze, and it would wait until the resource is downloaded, and then the execution would continue, right? Because until then, that the download is still happening. So for that, in order to not make a game freeze, we'll go for asynchronous programming. And in Unity's case, you can go for coroutines. So coroutines is a special kind of function that is provided by that is implemented in the mono behavior class, right? And basically it's the same as that of a function, but it has a special signature to it. So if we look at coroutine, so yeah, so tank explosion, this tank explosion is a coroutine. It can take parameters, right? Like similar to a function, but you can see that the return type is I enumerator. So if you are creating a coroutine, then it must have a return type of I enumerator. And yeah, the uh, yeah, so return type, and the remaining things are same as that of what you would want in a function to perform normally. So here I am just instantiating the particle system and making the particle system play, right? And here we can see a new kind of thing called yield return new wait for seconds, right? So this is basically what the coroutine would accept as a return type. So return type is an enumerator. So for that, we can make use of these special classes called wait for seconds and stuff. So I'll show you the different types of wait for classes. So we have wait for end of frame, wait for fixed update, wait for seconds. So all these implement the same base class, and that in turn is a type of enumerator. So that's why we are able to return an enumerator, and this coroutine would work perfectly. And this new wait for seconds, basically it takes a you can see it takes a float called seconds, and it suspends the coroutine execution for the given amount of seconds. So when you're giving 2f here, uh, I'm making it halt for 2 seconds, right? I'm making the coroutine stay in its tracks for 2 seconds, after which it would continue the execution, right? So in this case, I'm instantiating a particle effect, making the particle effect play, waiting for 2 seconds, and finally I'm destroying the particle effect. So that's what is happening here, and that's the whole idea of start coroutine. So start coroutine is what you would use to start a coroutine, as it says. Yeah. So you can't just go tanks explosion and the parameter like you'd call a regular function. That would not be the way to call a coroutine, but you gotta use start coroutine. And start coroutine, there are different types of overrides, and the one we are using here is the enumerator override, right? This is one of the override. One other override is takes the coroutine object, and there's another one which takes the method name in string, which is uh, not advisable to use because it's performance intensive, right? String comparison is not always not good in any situation, right? So in here I'm using the enumerator type of override, right? And yeah, that's tank explosion. So once the tank has exploded, I'll have to destroy the level. So you can see I've created a new service. So the level service, uh, basically I wanted it to be a singleton because it's a different uh, area from what we have explored. So we have a separate service for the player, we have a separate service for the enemy, we have a separate service for the bullet. So when you're dealing with uh, level like the environment and destroying the stuff in the environment, I thought it would be better to have a separate service for that, so that uh, the things regarding the environment are contained in that, right? So okay, we'll just look at level service. So it implements the generic singleton. So it's a singleton and entities. So these are the things that I want to destroy uh, when the game, like when the player dies, right? So I drag it and drop it from the scene itself. So enemy spawner, no, level manager. So these are the entities I am trying to destroy. So the military fields, oil fields, military oil fields, the ruins and the trees. Uh, wait, I think the rocks as well. Okay, military oil field, rocks and the trees. So that's entities, and explosion effect is I'm using the same tank explosion effect for these entities as well. So when they destroy with explosion effect. And finally, I have the camera controller. So this is an extra thing that I've implied. So basically, the camera will pan out, like it'll sort of zoom out when the distraction happens. So that's why I have the camera controller here. And okay, so we are calling level service dot instance dot destroy level. So this is the uh, coroutine that we are starting here, right? So we are starting the coroutine, and okay, so at the start you will see the camera zoom out itself. So I'll explain this a little bit later, and we'll just look at the two main things in destroy level. The first thing is destroy all enemies. The second thing is destroy environment. So destroy all enemies is what it uh, it's basically about the enemies, right? So it must be in the enemy service. So that's why I put it in the enemy service, and we'll look at enemy service, destroy all enemies, right? So basically, last time I did not store the enemy controllers. So this time I've implemented a sort of list to store all the enemies whenever they are created. So when an enemy is being created, create enemy tank. I'll return the enemy controller and store it in this list of enemies. And whenever the enemy gets destroyed, I'll compare the enemy controller, and basically I'll destroy that, uh, like I'll remove it from the list, right? And so that's one of the updates I have done. Yeah. And now we look at destroy enemies. So destroy enemies, basically we have all the enemies that are in the scene in this list. So we just have to go through each enemies in the list and destroy them one by one. So okay, this one is just I created so that there's a gap between the player getting destroyed and the enemy getting destroyed, or else it will just start destroying as soon as the player gets destroyed. So that's why I added 2 seconds. So once the player gets destroyed, right? So the player is getting destroyed here. The tank explosion happens, and 2 seconds later, the destroy all enemies. So 2 seconds later, the first enemy will get destroyed, right? And okay, enemy list. I have taken a new list of all the enemies because I'll be deleting the enemies. I think you can use the enemies itself, but yeah, I made a new list, and for each enemy controller I am destroying the enemy, right? And this destroy enemy is already present in the script, like enemy service script. I use this for destroying the enemies when they get damaged by the bullet, right? So that's the same thing. And once an enemy is destroyed, I wait for 2 seconds, and then it loops and it goes to the next enemy. That enemy gets destroyed, and the loop and I wait 2 seconds. So that's what is happening here. When there is no more enemies, the coroutine ends. So that's the whole of destroy all enemies, right? So once that is done, I have to destroy the environment. So destroy environment is part of the level. So I have it in the level service itself, right? And this is the coroutine. So for each item in entities, so entities has as you saw has multiple. It's a list, like it's an array, and it contains different game objects. So these game objects are like they have children, right? So we have to get each children from here and destroy its children. So that would give an cool effect, or else by destroying the whole of military, it won't look as nice as deleting each one, right? So that's what we'll be doing here. And some of these children have hierarchies as well. So we'll look at what I've done to uh, like what errors I faced and what I did to fix them, right? Okay, cool. Okay, for each item in entities, I destroy the entity. So I have created a separate method to destroy each entity, right? And I'll explain why yield return start coroutine itself. So here as well, I have used yield return start coroutine. I have used yield return start coroutine here as well. So the basic idea is when you're using start coroutine, it starts executing at the moment, right? So for example, let me say, this is how let me just so we have to do two things, uh, destroy all enemies and destroy elements. So I could just start coroutine and go enemy service dot instance dot destroy all enemies, and I could go start coroutine and destroy environment, right? So this is showing error because there is no yield return null. Yield return null, just let it be for now. So that's no error, but I could do this, right? I could go start coroutine and destroy all enemies and start coroutine and destroy environment, but I went for yield return start coroutine and yield return start coroutine because the main difference is when this is executed, all these coroutines are started at the exact same time, right? Because they are in the same order, right? There is no yield return between them, and that's why they don't have to wait for anything. All these coroutines get started at the same time, and for instance, when this is executed, my both my environment and my enemies will start destroying at the same time. So one tank and one building and another tank and another building, well, that could be good, but what I've done here is yield return, right? And this basically is means that I have to wait until the coroutine ends. So that's why I've gone for yield return. And yeah, so by having this, you're just waiting for this coroutine to end before you go to the next line, right? So when I go any yield return destroy all enemies, all the enemies get destroyed. Only then the next coroutine, that is destroy environment, is called. So I'll be using this a lot in here. So we'll just look at whatever. We'll just look at it. destroy environment, and I'm destroying each entity. So you saw that. So here I'm using yield return null, as you can see, because I want each entities to have their own time. So if I'm destroying the minefield, like what was it again? Uh, yeah, the military. So if I'm destroying the buildings in military, I want them to go one by one and then go to the next entity. So in here, military and oil field are entities. I want each entity to complete and then go to the next entity. So that's why I have yield written here. So the first entity would come in and it would start destroying, and it would wait uh, until all the coroutine ends, this coroutine, and then it would go to the next entity, right? So that's the idea behind this. And destroy entity, uh, yeah, so basically destroy entity, I'll show you. So this is the entity, right? And this entity has many children. So basically I have to go through each children and destroy them. And yeah, so that's what we'll be doing here for each transform item in entity that get components in children. So get components in children actually returns all the transforms, because I mentioned transform, but it returns all the children, right? All reference to children, including the parent itself. So I have the parent and I have the children. So these are all what uh, in this it returns its list, as you can see. It returns a array of transforms. So item goes through each transform, and we check each transform. So basically when I'm deleting these buildings, I need what um, because I'm doing this in runtime, I definitely need the parent transform, right? So I can't go delete this transform and go searching for these transforms, right? And that's why I have to not delete the entity itself, the parent object, but delete the children, right? So for that I've set up this if condition. So if the current item is equal to entity dot transform, right? So if the current item is a parent, then I just skip it. So continue means we go to the next iteration, right? And this thing. So this thing is when in oil field you can see the pump jack. So pump jack has its child, right? So what happens is when I'm going, if I don't have this around, if I don't have this line, then what basically happens is oil field, so it's the same as entity, it doesn't destroy. Oil storage 1, pump jack, and then pump jack gets destroyed, and then it goes to this pump jack, but there is no reference to it because it got destroyed. So basically I have to skip this one and delete this one first, right? So that's what is happening here. So if item child, like child count, so if this item, if any of the items has a child count that is not 0, then I'll skip that object. So here I'm skipping pump jack and going to the next object, so pump the child pump jack, right? So that's what is happening here. Yeah, I'm getting the position and destroying the object, starting the coroutine for the explosion along with the position, right? And then I'm waiting for 5 seconds, for zero point 0.5 seconds. And once that point zero point 0.5 is over, I go to the next item in the entity and destroy it. So that's basically what I've done so far. Yeah. Have I missed anything? Yeah, the zoom thing. Okay, so camera. I'll show you the camera. So when you're destroying the player tank, tank explodes, destroys, and destroy level is called. In destroy level, the first thing is the camera controller zoom out. So if I go to camera controller, you'll be able to see this coroutine called zoom out. So main camera orthographic side. So I'll show you what this is. So if we go to the main camera, and we'll be able to see this size thing. So I figured out that increasing the size made it look like it was zooming out, right? So I just get that reference. So main camera dot orthographic size, because it's orthographic, I figured this should be orthographic size. And basically until 19, like until the float is 19. So 19 was when it was uh, in the frame, right? And it the basically using the coroutine, I'm increasing the orthographic size, and I have an offset level. So how much I should increase, and how much time I should wait before increasing next. So those two I have set up as serialized field. So I can set them in the inspector itself. So if you go to camera rig, I'll be able to set the zoom out speed and the offset level. So like if you just play it and the player gets destroyed, the camera would pan out slowly, right? And that's how uh, we can get a cool like effect, right? I'll show it again. Okay, so the player can destroy tanks, right? And the player gets in contact with the tank multiple times, then it destroys itself. Then the camera starts panning out, the enemies get destroyed, and one by one the in items like the objects in the scene gets destroyed as well. So that's what I've done so far. Cool. Yeah, thanks for watching.